The art of the roofing scam was simple. Identify vulnerable homeowners, inflate the damage, demand payment up front, then disappear or do shoddy work. 32-year-old Seth Morgan had mastered this routine over 5 profitable years. Today's target was an elderly woman in an aging colonial on Maple Street, alone, anxious about roof damage, and completely clueless. Or so he thought. Patricia Winters adjusted her glasses as she watched Seth's unmarked truck pull into her driveway. At 74, she moved slower than in her youth, but her mind remained razor-sharp. 40 years building Winters Roofing into the largest construction company in the county had taught her to spot a fraud from a mile away. Today, she would teach this young man a lesson he'd never forget. The most dangerous predator isn't always the one with the sharpest claws, but the one who thinks their prey is helpless. Seth Morgan was about to learn this lesson the hard way. His entire scheme relied on people believing they knew nothing about roofing. Unfortunately for him, the silver-haired woman watching him approach her front door knew everything. Patricia's colonial house on Maple Street was the perfect bait. Mature trees overhanging the roof, gutters partially detached, visible water stains beneath the eaves. Though meticulously maintained inside, she had deliberately left these minor issues unaddressed, creating a perfect target for the roofing scammers she'd been hearing about from elderly friends in her community. Seth straightened his Best Value Roofing polo shirt, a company that existed only on his business cards and magnetic truck signs, and grabbed his clipboard. This routine practically ran itself. Concerned expression, industry jargon, gradually escalating alarm about dangerous conditions, and finally the pressure for an immediate cash deposit before more damage occurs. When Patricia opened the door, Seth's practiced smile appeared instantly. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Seth from Best Value Roofing. We're doing work in the neighborhood and noticed some concerning issues with your shingles. Mind if I take a quick look?" No charge for an inspection. His tone was warm, concerned, utterly counterfeit. "Oh my, how kind of you to notice," Patricia replied, her voice deliberately shaky, playing into every stereotype of elderly helplessness. "I've been worried about that roof for some time now. My late husband always handled these things." The fabricated vulnerability was perfect. A widow, alone, without technical knowledge. Seth practically salivated at the easy mark. "Sorry for your loss, ma'am," Seth responded automatically, though his eyes were already assessing the roofline, calculating potential profits. It can be overwhelming handling home maintenance alone. That's why we like to check on homes in the area after bad weather. Preventative care saves thousands in the long run. Patricia nodded gratefully, stepping aside to let him enter her immaculate living room. "I did hear something concerning during the last storm, like a scratching sound above my bedroom." She pointed vaguely upward, the gesture of someone who didn't understand what might be happening but was certainly worried about it. Seth nodded with manufactured gravity. Water intrusion can cause all sorts of sounds as it compromises the structural integrity of the roof system. The meaningless technical-sounding phrase was designed to intimidate rather than inform. A tactic Patricia recognized immediately, but responded to with wide-eyed concern, feeding his confidence. "Would you mind if I take a look from above? I brought my ladder. Won't take but 15 minutes to do a proper inspection," Seth continued, gesturing toward his truck. The quick inspection was crucial to his scheme, just long enough to take misleading photos and identify minor issues he could exaggerate, not long enough for real analysis. "Of course, please do," Patricia agreed, adding a nervous tremor to her voice. "I'll put on some coffee while you work." As Seth headed back outside, she suppressed a smile. In her office at Winters Roofing headquarters, she had reviewed hundreds of insurance claims involving scammers like him, developing a comprehensive understanding of their techniques. While Seth set up his extension ladder with practiced efficiency, Patricia busied herself in the kitchen, occasionally peering through the window to monitor his movements. She had equipped her roof with subtle cameras disguised as vents the week before, capturing every moment of his so-called inspection from multiple angles. Seth spent exactly 8 minutes on the roof, enough time to take close-up photos of normal aging on the shingles, create minor damage by loosening a few strategic tiles, and gather material for his dramatic presentation. He returned to ground level with a grave expression already forming, ready to deliver the bad news. "Mrs. Winters, I'm afraid I've found some concerning issues," Seth announced when Patricia invited him back inside. He gestured to her dining room table. "Mind if we sit down? I'd like to walk you through what I discovered." The tactic was deliberate, sitting established authority, and made it harder for elderly Marks to simply walk away. Patricia nodded, settling into a chair with deliberate slowness. "Oh dear, is it serious?" she asked, her voice quavering perfectly. She had positioned a small digital recorder in the flower arrangement centerpiece, documenting every word of Seth's approaching fraud. Her apparent fragility was the perfect camouflage for her meticulous preparation. Seth arranged his clipboard and phone, pulling up the misleading photos he'd taken. "I don't want to alarm you, but you've got significant damage that needs immediate attention." He turned his phone toward her, showing a close-up of ordinary wear that looked dramatic without context. "See this curling and separation? That's moisture penetration." Patricia leaned forward, squinting at the phone with an expression of concerned confusion. "Is that bad? I don't really understand what I'm looking at." She was testing him, seeing how far he would go in exploiting her perceived ignorance. Each exaggeration, each lie, was another piece of evidence being recorded for later use. "It's quite serious," Seth confirmed, his tone dropping to convey gravity. "These damaged shingles are allowing water to seep underneath, which eventually leads to deck rot, insulation degradation, and potentially even black mold formation. Left untreated, you're looking at tens of thousands in structural repairs within months." Patricia gasped, clutching her cardigan in apparent distress. "Thousands? Oh my, I'm on a fixed income. I had no idea it could be so expensive." The performance was flawless, exactly what Seth expected and wanted to hear. Financial vulnerability combined with fear was the perfect mixture to push for his next move. "That's exactly why I approached you today," Seth explained, his voice warming with false compassion. "Catching these issues early saves homeowners like yourself from catastrophic expenses later." He flipped to a pre-printed estimate form on his clipboard. "The good news is, we can address this before it becomes a major problem." Patricia watched as Seth began writing on his form, noting how he deliberately used technical-sounding terms without explanation. Ice dam prevention system instead of simple flashing, moisture barrier enhancement rather than basic underlayment. The tactic was designed to justify inflated costs through complexity and false expertise. Now, a complete premium roof replacement would normally run about $16,500, Seth continued, writing the figure and circling it dramatically. "But since we're already working in the neighborhood and have materials on hand, I can offer you our neighborhood discount." The fictitious original price was at least double what a legitimate replacement would cost. Patricia's eyes widened appropriately at the figure. "Goodness, that's more than I expected. Is there any way to just fix the damaged areas?" The question was a common one from actual victims, allowing Seth to launch into his prepared explanation of why partial repairs were ultimately more expensive. Another standard deception in the scammer's playbook. Partial repairs often fail within months because they don't address the underlying issues, Seth explained with practiced patience. They're actually more costly long-term. "But here's what I can do." He wrote a new figure with a flourish. $9,800. That's our complete system at over 40% savings because we're already mobilized in your area. The discount was completely fabricated, the neighborhood work non-existent, but Seth delivered it with such confidence that most Marks gratefully accepted the fictional savings. Patricia's careful nod and worried expression revealed nothing of her internal cataloging of each fraudulent claim. Each pressure tactic applied with practiced precision. "That still seems like quite a lot," Patricia murmured, intentionally giving Seth the opening to apply more pressure. She needed to document his full routine, the complete sequence of manipulation that had successfully fleeced so many elderly homeowners in her community. Each exchange was another link in the chain of evidence. Seth leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Between us, Mrs. Winters, I noticed some hail impact patterns that your insurance might cover. I can't officially recommend making a claim, but..." He trailed off suggestively. Many of our customers find their policies cover most, if not all, of our premium service. Insurance fraud, exactly what Patricia had suspected and now had recorded. She maintained her facade of innocent ignorance. Really? I wouldn't know how to even start with an insurance claim. The vulnerability in her voice was calculated to prompt Seth's next offer, positioning himself as her advocate while planning to pocket the insurance payout. "We handle that process for our customers all the time," Seth assured her smoothly. "Just provide your policy information, sign our authorization form, and we'll communicate directly with the adjusters. Makes it completely stress-free for you." His smile never reached his eyes as he slid a contract across the table. Patricia examined the document, noting the small print that authorized Best Value Roofing to receive direct payment from the insurance company. There was also a cancellation clause with a substantial penalty, designed to lock customers in even if they discovered the scam. "This seems quite complicated," she observed mildly. "It's standard industry language," Seth dismissed with a wave. "Just protects both parties during the project. The important thing is getting this work scheduled before more damage occurs." He tapped the signature line impatiently. "We'll need a deposit today to secure your spot in our schedule. 25% is standard." 25% of $9,800 would be... Patricia calculated slowly, appearing overwhelmed by the figures. "Almost $2,500. That's a significant amount to pay up front." She was deliberately hitting every trigger point, every common objection that Seth would have prepared responses for. His entire playbook was being exposed. Seth nodded understanding while subtly pushing the contract closer to her. "I completely understand your concern. That's why we offer a special senior discount. $2,000 even for the deposit." No such discount existed. He was simply adjusting to a round number that sounded more attainable while still being substantially profitable. "I'd need to discuss this with my son first," Patricia said, introducing the common family member obstacle that scammers particularly dreaded. "He helps me with these big decisions. Perhaps I could call him now?" This was typically where pressure tactics intensified, as scammers tried to prevent outside perspectives from intervening. Right on cue, Seth's expression shifted to one of carefully calibrated concern. "Of course you can call him, but I should mention our special pricing is just for today. We've had overwhelming response in this neighborhood, and our schedule is filling quickly. By tomorrow, both the discount and our availability will be gone." Patricia furrowed her brow, appearing torn between concern about the roof and hesitation about the expense. "I'd still feel better consulting with my son. Surely your company would understand that a widow needs to be careful with such large expenditures?" She was deliberately emphasizing her vulnerability while testing his ethics. Seth checked his watch, his impatience briefly visible before the mask of concern returned. "Let me see what I can do." He pretended to make a call to his non-existent supervisor, speaking loudly enough for Patricia to hear about helping the widow and making an exception, before returning with a triumphant smile. "Good news. My manager has authorized an additional discount and can hold our crew for 24 hours, but we'll need a good faith deposit today to secure the materials. Just $500 cash. Once you speak with your son, you can pay the remainder." This was the classic pivot. A smaller amount that seemed more reasonable, but still profitable. $500 in cash? "I don't keep that much in the house," Patricia replied, introducing another common hurdle. Would he offer to drive her to the bank, a particularly predatory tactic that isolated elderly victims from potential intervention? Or would he suggest a credit card payment, despite the cash discount he'd emphasized? "I'd be happy to drive you to your bank," Seth offered immediately, confirming Patricia's prediction. "Many of our elderly customers appreciate the assistance, and it ensures we can secure those materials today." His helpful smile couldn't disguise the predatory nature of isolating a vulnerable person from potential family intervention. Patricia hesitated, then sighed in apparent resignation. "Well, I suppose if it's only $500 today, and you're sure this can't wait until tomorrow when my son could be here." She was giving Seth one final opportunity to demonstrate some ethical boundary, some limit to his willingness to exploit an elderly woman's fears. "I wish it could, Mrs. Winters, But we've already got crews scheduled through next month, and these spring storms will only make your situation worse. Seth tapped the alarming photos again. Water damage compounds exponentially. What costs $9,800 today could easily become $20,000 more with just one more heavy rain. Patricia nodded slowly, as if finally convinced. I understand. Let me get my purse and we can go to the bank. As she rose, moving with deliberate slowness, she added casually, I didn't catch the name of your company again. Best Value Roofing, was it? I don't recall seeing your trucks in the neighborhood before. Yes, ma'am. Best Value Roofing. We're fairly new to this specific area, but have been serving the wider region for years. The lie came easily, practiced. In reality, Seth had operated under 6 different company names in 3 counties, disappearing and rebranding whenever complaints accumulated or authorities started investigating. Patricia disappeared into the next room, ostensibly to retrieve her purse. Instead, she quickly texted a prearranged signal to her executive assistant at Winters Roofing headquarters. The plan they'd been developing for weeks was now in motion. Returning to the living room, she smiled tremulously at Seth. I'm ready whenever you are. Seth helped Patricia into his truck with exaggerated courtesy, even holding her elbow as she climbed into the passenger seat, the very picture of respectful assistance, though his real motivation was ensuring his payday. The bank isn't far, right? First National on Main Street? He was already calculating how quickly he could secure payment. Yes, just 3 blocks down, Patricia confirmed, settling into the seat and surreptitiously checking that her recorder was still functioning. I've banked there for nearly 50 years, ever since my husband Frank and I started our little business. She was dropping the first hint of her true identity, watching to see if Seth registered any recognition. He didn't. What kind of business did you have, Mrs. Winters? Seth asked without genuine interest, merely making conversation as he pulled out of the driveway. The name Winters Roofing apparently meant nothing to him, despite its dominance in the local construction industry, revealing how truly disconnected he was from legitimate businesses. Oh, just a small construction company, Patricia replied vaguely, hiding her amusement as Seth failed to make the connection. Frank handled all the technical aspects. I managed the books and customer relations. In truth, she had been the primary force behind the company's growth, developing their training program and quality control standards. As they drove, Seth continued his sales pitch, emphasizing the urgency of addressing her roof issues and detailing the premium materials his company used. Descriptions that Patricia recognized as grossly misrepresenting standard asphalt shingles. Each false claim was another piece of evidence being quietly recorded as they approached the bank. Patricia nodded along, occasionally asking questions that prompted Seth to make increasingly exaggerated claims about his company's expertise and materials. And how many years warranty do you provide on your work? She asked innocently, knowing that fly-by-night operations rarely honored any guarantees they offered. Lifetime warranty on materials, 5 years on labor, Seth replied smoothly, though his contract actually specified a non-transferable 1-year limited warranty with numerous exclusions in the fine print. Best in the business, we stand behind our work 100%. The empty promise was delivered with absolute conviction. That's very reassuring, Patricia murmured as they pulled into the bank parking lot. She noticed a familiar car already positioned near the entrance, her company's chief operations officer, right on schedule. The trap was nearly ready to spring, but she needed a few more minutes of recorded evidence before the confrontation. Inside the bank, Seth stayed close to Patricia, guiding her toward the teller windows with a hand lightly on her elbow. The possessive gesture masked its true purpose, preventing her from speaking privately with bank staff who might question why an elderly woman was withdrawing cash for a roofing contractor who had appeared out of nowhere. I'll need to withdraw $500 cash, Patricia told the teller, a young woman who gave Seth a slightly suspicious glance before processing the transaction. Banks had become increasingly alert to scams targeting seniors, but the relatively small amount and Patricia's composed demeanor didn't trigger immediate intervention protocols. While waiting for the teller to count out the money, Patricia deliberately brought up another concern. Mr. Morgan, I forgot to ask, will you be pulling proper permits for this work? My neighborhood association is quite strict about that. It was another test, another opportunity for Seth to incriminate himself further. Seth's smile dimmed just slightly before he recovered. We handle all permitting as part of our service package, he assured her. Another lie captured by the recorder. In reality, he never pulled permits, as official documentation created a paper trail and invited municipal inspections that would expose his substandard work and unlicensed status. The teller returned with the cash, which Patricia carefully placed in her wallet. "Thank you, dear," she said warmly to the teller before turning back to Seth. "Shall we return to the house so I can get a proper receipt for this deposit?" Her tone remained pleasant, giving no indication that she was laying the groundwork for the coming revelation. "Actually, I can write you a receipt right now," Seth offered quickly, eager to secure the cash before anything could interfere with the transaction. He pulled out a generic receipt book, the kind available at any office supply store, with no company information pre-printed, another red flag about his operation's legitimacy. "I'd prefer something on company letterhead," Patricia insisted gently. "For my records and for when my son asks to see the paperwork. He's very particular about documentation." She was deliberately prolonging the interaction, ensuring Seth committed fully to the scam before she revealed her true identity and purpose. Seth's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly before he nodded. "Of course. We'll handle that back at your house. I can also show you samples of the premium shingles we'll be using." More fiction. He had no samples, no premium materials, just whatever basic supplies he could source at the lowest possible cost to maximize his profit. As they walked back to his truck, Patricia noticed her COO had positioned himself near the exit, phone in hand, documenting Seth's vehicle and license plate. The final pieces were falling into place. She allowed Seth to help her back into the passenger seat, maintaining her facade of appreciation for his apparently solicitous attention. During the return drive, Seth began detailing the fictional work schedule, claiming his crew would arrive early the following week. "We'll need the balance payment before we begin work, of course. Company policy." In reality, once he had secured the deposit, he would either disappear completely or perform minimal, substandard work before demanding final payment. "Of course," Patricia agreed mildly. "I'll arrange for the remainder after speaking with my son. I'm sure he'll understand the urgency once I explain the situation." She was deliberately noncommittal, knowing that Seth would likely increase pressure tactics once they returned to her home, and he believed the initial payment was secured. As they pulled back into her driveway, Patricia noticed with satisfaction that 2 Winters roofing trucks had parked across the street, their distinctive blue and silver logo clearly visible. Seth didn't seem to notice them as he helped her from the vehicle, his attention focused on finalizing the deposit and securing her signature on his fraudulent contract. Inside the house, Patricia gestured toward the dining room table, where Seth's paperwork still lay. "Let's finish up this paperwork so you can be on your way. I'm sure you have other customers to help today." Her tone remained pleasant, betraying nothing of the confrontation about to unfold in her carefully prepared living room. Seth nodded eagerly, pulling out his chair and preparing to write the receipt for her deposit. "Just a simple $500 down payment today," he confirmed, holding out his hand expectantly for the cash. "And if you'll just sign the authorization form, we can get everything processed with your insurance company right away." Patricia sat down across from him but didn't immediately reach for her wallet. Instead, she folded her hands on the table and fixed Seth with a suddenly penetrating gaze. "Before we proceed, Mr. Morgan, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Best Value Roofing. For instance, what's your contractor license number?" The question caught Seth off guard, his outstretched hand faltering slightly. "I don't have that information with me. My office can provide it tomorrow when we process your paperwork." The deflection was automatic, practiced, typical of unlicensed operators who preyed on homeowners who rarely checked credentials with state licensing boards. "That's strange," Patricia remarked, her voice losing its quaver entirely. "Because I checked with the state licensing board this morning, and there is no Best Value Roofing registered in this state. There's also no Seth Morgan holding a roofing contractor license. Would you care to explain that discrepancy? Her transformation was unmistakable now. Seth's expression flickered between confusion and alarm. The fragile, uncertain elderly woman had vanished, replaced by someone direct, authoritative, and unmistakably in command of the situation. He shifted in his seat, hand withdrawing. There must be some misunderstanding. Perhaps it's filed under a parent company name. No misunderstanding at all, Patricia replied calmly, reaching into her cardigan pocket and extracting her business card. She slid it across the table with deliberate precision. Patricia Winters, founder and CEO of Winters Roofing. Perhaps you've heard of us? We've only been the largest roofing contractor in the county for the past 4 decades. The color drained from Seth's face as he stared at the card, then back at Patricia, comprehension dawning with horrifying clarity. There's been a mistake. I was just trying to help. I think I should go. He half rose from his chair, fight-or-flight instinct clearly kicking in as the trap he'd walked into became unmistakably apparent. Sit down, Mr. Morgan, Patricia commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to running a multi-million-dollar company. Surprisingly, Seth obeyed, sinking back into his chair. We're not finished yet. In fact, we're just getting started. She pressed a button on her phone and her front door opened. 2 men in Winters roofing uniforms entered the living room, followed by Patricia's chief operations officer, Martin Chen, who was carrying a tablet. Mrs. Winters, are you all right? Martin asked, though his concerned tone was belied by the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The plan had worked perfectly. I'm fine, Martin, Patricia assured him before turning back to Seth, who now looked utterly trapped. Mr. Morgan was just about to explain why he's impersonating a licensed contractor, creating false damage on my roof, and attempting to defraud me of thousands of dollars. Weren't you, Mr. Morgan? Her gaze was unwavering. Seth's breathing quickened, eyes darting between the newcomers and the door, calculating whether escape was possible. This is ridiculous. I was providing a legitimate estimate for necessary repairs. You can't prove otherwise. His bluster was hollow, his confidence evaporating as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Actually, we can prove quite a bit, Patricia responded calmly. She nodded to Martin, who turned his tablet toward Seth, playing a crystal-clear video of him on her roof, deliberately loosening shingles and creating damage where none had existed. Our documentation begins with you manufacturing the very problems you then discovered. Seth stared at the tablet in disbelief, watching himself clearly creating the evidence he'd later use to justify his fraudulent estimate. You were recording me? You can't. He stumbled over his words, realizing too late that he'd walked into an elaborately planned sting operation orchestrated by someone far more sophisticated than he was. We've been recording everything, Patricia confirmed, placing her digital voice recorder on the table beside his clipboard. Every false claim about my roof, every exaggerated risk, every fabricated discount, every lie about your non-existent company. Even your offer to help commit insurance fraud, which is a felony in this state, in case you weren't aware. Martin stepped forward, setting a folder on the table. We've also compiled records of 6 other homeowners in this county who filed complaints about your operations. Different company names, same tactics. 3 of them were over 70 years old. 2 lost their entire savings. His tone was professional, but laced with controlled anger. Seth's face had gone from pale to ashen. Look, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. I'll refund any deposit and we can forget this whole thing happened. He was grasping for any exit now, the predator suddenly desperate to escape the jaws that had closed around him. No harm done, right? Just a business disagreement. Patricia's expression remained unchanged. A business disagreement? Is that what you call targeting elderly homeowners, creating damage on their property, lying about necessary repairs, and pressuring them into paying for services you never intend to properly provide? That's not business, Mr. Morgan. That's criminal fraud. Seth swallowed hard, his confident facade completely shattered. What do you want from me? The question came out almost as a whisper, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. The evidence against him was overwhelming, documented with a level of professionalism he'd never anticipated from what he'd thought was an easy mark. Justice, Patricia answered simply. "For every elderly person you've targeted, for every homeowner you've lied to, for every vulnerable individual whose trust you've exploited for profit." She nodded to Martin, who stepped outside briefly, returning moments later with a uniformed police officer who had been waiting in one of the company trucks. "Officer Reynolds," Patricia greeted the policeman warmly. "Thank you for coming. We have the situation well documented as discussed." She had clearly coordinated with local law enforcement in advance, another level of preparation that demonstrated just how thoroughly Seth had been outmatched from the moment he approached her house. The officer nodded professionally. "Mrs. Winters, Mr. Chen." He turned his attention to Seth, who seemed to have shrunk in his chair. "Sir, I'm going to need some identification." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Seth fumbled for his wallet with trembling hands, his earlier confidence now completely evaporated. "We have video evidence of property damage, audio recordings of fraudulent claims, documentation of operating without a license, and statements from multiple victims identifying this individual," Martin explained to the officer, handing over a USB drive containing the organized evidence, all collected with Mrs. Winters' participation as a cooperating witness. Seth watched in stunned silence as his license was copied, his information logged, and the evidence of his crimes cataloged with methodical efficiency. The elaborate trap had been perfectly executed, leaving him no plausible deniability, no room for evasion, no path to escape the consequences that were now rapidly descending upon him. "Mr. Morgan," Officer Reynolds finally said, "based on the evidence presented and the statements collected, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted fraud, impersonating a licensed contractor, and willful property damage. Please stand and place your hands behind your back." The words fell like stones in the suddenly silent room. Seth rose shakily, the handcuffs clicking around his wrists in shocking finality. "This is insane," he protested weakly. "It was just an estimate. I didn't even take any money." The defense sounded hollow even to his own ears, contradicted by the comprehensive evidence Patricia and her team had methodically collected throughout their interaction. "Attempted fraud is still fraud," the officer explained professionally as he read Seth his rights. "And the property damage alone is a chargeable offense, not to mention the pattern of similar behavior documented with other victims." The standard Miranda warning echoed in the living room, marking the formal end of Seth's scamming career. As Seth was escorted to the waiting police cruiser, Patricia stood in her doorway watching with somber satisfaction. This wasn't about vengeance or humiliation. It was about protection. Every scammer stopped meant dozens of vulnerable homeowners saved from exploitation, particularly the elderly who were so often targeted by such schemes. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble personally," Martin observed quietly beside her. "We could have handled it with the authorities directly." It was a gentle reminder that at 74, Patricia could have delegated this operation rather than making herself the bait in their elaborate trap. Patricia shook her head slightly. "I needed to see it firsthand, to understand exactly how these scammers operate, how they pressure and manipulate. Reports and statements don't capture the psychological tactics." Her expression was resolute. Besides, who better to play a vulnerable elderly woman than someone they'd never suspect wasn't one? Inside, Patricia's team was already compiling the final documentation, organizing the evidence for the prosecutor who would handle the case. The living room had transformed into an impromptu command center, with Winters Roofing employees efficiently cataloging every aspect of Seth's attempted fraud while removing the hidden cameras. We identified 3 more operations in neighboring counties using similar tactics, one of Patricia's employees reported, showing her a tablet with surveillance photos. All targeting elderly homeowners, all using variations of the same script. We forwarded the information to the appropriate authorities. The sting was expanding beyond Seth alone. Patricia nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Prepare a comprehensive report for the Contractors Association and the Senior Protection Alliance. We need to conduct awareness workshops in the affected communities immediately." Her mind was already moving beyond Seth's individual case to the broader problem of protecting vulnerable homeowners. Later that afternoon, Patricia sat in her home office speaking with Detective Marlene Jenkins, who specialized in crimes against the elderly. "We've been after this group for months," the detective explained, reviewing the evidence Patricia had collected. "Your documentation is exceptional, better than most professional sting operations." 40 years in construction teaches you about documentation," Patricia replied with a slight smile. "Everything in writing, everything recorded, everything verified by multiple sources. It's how I built my company, and it's how I'm going to help you dismantle these scam operations." Her determination was evident in every word. Detective Jenkins nodded appreciatively. "Morgan is already talking, hoping for leniency. Gave us names of 2 associates running similar scams in adjacent counties. With your evidence as leverage, we might be able to break open the entire network." The ripple effects of Patricia's carefully planned sting were already spreading through the criminal investigation. Outside Patricia's window, a legitimate winter's roofing crew was carefully repairing the minor damage Seth had caused during his fraudulent inspection. The company that Patricia had built from the ground up now employed over 200 people, all properly licensed, trained, and held to the rigorous quality standards she had established decades ago. "I'm scheduling press conferences with the County Commissioner and Consumer Protection Bureau next week," Martin informed Patricia as the detective departed. "They want to use this case to launch a broader awareness campaign about contractor fraud targeting seniors. Your participation would add significant credibility to the effort." Patricia agreed without hesitation. "I'll be there, and I want our company to offer free roof inspections for seniors next month. Documented, photographed, with written reports they can trust. No sales pitch, no pressure, just honest assessments from licensed professionals." Her determination to counter the scammer's damage was unwavering. In the days that followed, local news outlets picked up the story of how Patricia Winters, septuagenarian CEO, had personally orchestrated the sting that caught a notorious roofing scammer. The coverage highlighted the growing problem of contractor fraud targeting elderly homeowners, while showcasing Patricia's innovative approach to combating it. "It wasn't about one scammer," Patricia explained during a television interview, her dignified presence commanding respect. "It's about protecting our most vulnerable community members from predatory tactics. These aren't just financial crimes, they're violations of trust that leave lasting psychological damage, particularly for seniors living alone." Seth Morgan's arrest led to a cascade of revelations about similar operations throughout the region. His cooperation with authorities, motivated by the overwhelming evidence against him, helped prosecutors identify an informal network of scammers who shared techniques, locations, and information about vulnerable targets, particularly in retirement communities. Patricia didn't attend Seth's eventual court hearing, having already provided her detailed witness statement and evidence. Martin reported back that Seth had received 3 years imprisonment plus restitution requirements for the multiple victims identified during the expanded investigation. Justice had been served, systematically and thoroughly. The awareness campaign launched by Patricia in partnership with local authorities produced immediate results. Reports of contractor fraud decreased by 40% in the first 6 months, as senior centers, community organizations, and local media amplified the warning signs and prevention strategies Patricia had helped develop based on her first-hand experience. At Winters Roofing headquarters, Patricia implemented a new division dedicated specifically to community education and fraud prevention. The team developed accessible materials explaining common roofing scam tactics, created a verification hotline for seniors uncertain about contractor legitimacy, and partnered with law enforcement to provide rapid response resources for suspected scams in progress. The experience with Seth Morgan fundamentally changed Patricia's business focus in what she had expected would be her quiet final years at the company's helm. "I built this company to provide quality roofing," she told her executive team. "But our new mission must include protecting vulnerable consumers from those who dishonor this industry." Within the local construction community, Patricia's actions inspired a broader response. Other legitimate contractors began offering similar education programs, creating an alliance of established businesses committed to industry integrity. What had begun as one woman's determination to catch a scammer had evolved into a community-wide protection initiative. 6 months after Seth's arrest, Patricia received a letter from an elderly woman who had nearly fallen victim to a similar scam. "Because of your presentation at our senior center, I recognized the warning signs," she'd written. "You saved me from losing my savings." Such messages arrived weekly, each one confirming the value of Patricia's new mission. Martin had initially worried about Patricia's direct involvement in the sting operation, concerned about potential risks to her safety and reputation. Now he marveled at how she had transformed what could have been a simple criminal case into a comprehensive community protection program that enhanced, rather than diminished, her company's standing. "You never cease to amaze me," he admitted one afternoon as they reviewed the newest educational materials being distributed to senior centers. "Most people your age would be content with retirement, not personally taking down criminal enterprises and revolutionizing industry standards." His admiration was evident in every word. Patricia's response was characteristic of the philosophy that had guided her career. "Retirement is for people who've accomplished everything they set out to do," she said simply. "I built a company that puts quality roofs over people's heads. Now I need to make sure that work isn't undermined by those who exploit vulnerability for profit." The State Contractors Board took notice of Patricia's initiative, inviting her to help develop enhanced verification systems and consumer protection regulations. Her first-hand experience with scammer tactics provided invaluable insights into the psychological manipulation that existing regulations failed to address, creating opportunities for needed reform. News of Patricia's successful sting operation and subsequent advocacy spread beyond local boundaries, attracting attention from consumer protection agencies in neighboring states. She began receiving invitations to speak at industry conferences, sharing her experiences and the comprehensive prevention program she had developed at Winters Roofing. On the one-year anniversary of Seth Morgan's arrest, Patricia stood at the podium during the opening of the county's first contractor verification center, a facility she had largely funded through her company's foundation. Looking out at the assembled community members, officials, and media representatives, she delivered a message that epitomized her life's work. Trust is the foundation of any worthy enterprise. When that trust is violated, particularly in ways that target vulnerability, we all bear responsibility for restoring it. Today, we've created more than just a verification center. We've established a commitment that in this community, predators will find no easy prey, and those who need protection will always find it.